The city streets pulsed with the quiet hum of neon signs and the occasional honk of passing cars. But in the heart of that restless night, Angela Thompson's footsteps echoed louder than the world around her. A black woman in her late 40s, she carried herself with the calm dignity of someone who had been hardened by life, but refused to let it steal her spirit. She wore her nurse's scrubs, slightly faded from years of washing, her sneakers squeaking softly on the cracked pavement. Her shift had been long. 12 hours of tending to patients who leaned on her not just for medical care, but for comfort she somehow always found a way to give. Her body begged her to rest, but she still had one last stop before heading home. A corner store, its flickering fluorescent sign spelling out Mart, with the M barely hanging on. Angela entered, picking up bread, milk, and a box of tea bags. The clerk, a young man who knew her by name, smiled warmly. "Long night again, Miss Angela?" he asked. She gave a weary nod, replying, "A nurse's work never really ends, Jason." As she stepped back outside, grocery bag in hand, the night had grown heavier, the air colder. Streetlights flickered, casting uneven shadows across the sidewalk. She noticed the police cruiser parked at the corner, a familiar sight, but one that always made her tense. She wasn't doing anything wrong, but experience had taught her that being innocent didn't always protect you. The cruiser door opened, and out stepped Officer Malloy, a tall, broad man with a rigid posture and a sharpness in his eyes that seemed to search for trouble even when there was none. His partner, Officer Daniels, a younger cop with nervous energy, followed close behind. They whispered something to each other, and then Malloy's gaze locked on Angela. "Hey you, stop right there." Malloy's voice boomed across the street. Angela froze, clutching the grocery bag tighter. Her pulse quickened. "Me?" she asked cautiously, pointing to herself. Malloy smirked. "Yeah, you. What are you doing out here this late?" Angela's brows knitted together. "I just got off work. I'm heading home." Daniels stepped forward, his hand resting near his holster. "At midnight? With a bag of groceries? That sounds suspicious to me." A hook tightened in Angela's chest. She knew this pattern too well. A simple night could turn into a nightmare within seconds. She forced her voice to remain calm. "Officers, I'm a nurse. I work long hours. These are just groceries." She lifted the bag slightly, showing the bread and milk inside. Malloy sneered. "We've had reports of loitering and shoplifting in this neighborhood. You fit the description." Her breath caught. "Fit the description?" she repeated. "I came out of the store 2 minutes ago. You can ask Jason inside." But Malloy didn't move toward the store. Instead, he closed the distance between them, his boots heavy on the pavement. The tension in the air thickened. Neighbors peered from their windows, curtains shifting, but no one stepped outside. Malloy's eyes hardened as he loomed over her. "Drop the bag." Angela hesitated. "Sir, please. These are just groceries for my family." "I said drop it." His voice cut through the night, sharp as a blade. Angela carefully lowered the bag onto the sidewalk, her hands trembling slightly. Her mind raced. How could a nurse coming home with groceries be seen as a threat? Yet here she was, standing under the scrutiny of 2 armed officers who looked at her as though she were already guilty. Daniels circled around her, inspecting the bag. He kicked at it, causing the milk carton to topple over and leak. "Doesn't look like much," he muttered. "Could be hiding something, though." Angela's heart sank as the white liquid spread across the concrete. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "Please. I've done nothing wrong." Malloy stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "You think you can talk your way out? You people always have excuses." Her jaw tightened, but she swallowed the rising anger. She couldn't afford to escalate. But inside, a storm brewed, decades of slights, of being looked at as less, of carrying herself with grace while the world spat in her face. Then Malloy shoved her shoulder. Not hard enough to knock her down, but enough to humiliate. Angela stumbled slightly, gasps echoing from a couple of bystanders across the street. A man pulled out his phone to record. "Stop resisting," Malloy barked, even though she hadn't moved except to steady herself. Angela lifted her hands. "I'm not resisting. Please, you're making a mistake." Daniels glanced at the phone recording, unease flickering across his face. "Malloy, maybe we should." But Malloy cut him off. "No, she's hiding something." His hand shot out, gripping Angela's wrist tightly. Pain shot up her arm as she winced. "Sir, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I'm a nurse. I serve this community every day. Don't do this." Malloy's eyes flashed with contempt. "A nurse? That doesn't mean you're not a thief." And then, with a move that stunned everyone watching, Malloy slapped her hard across the face. The sound cracked through the night like a gunshot. Angela staggered back, clutching her cheek, tears stinging her eyes, not just from the pain, but from the humiliation. Gasps erupted from the small crowd that had now gathered. The man with the phone shouted, "I got that on video." For a brief moment, Malloy's face twitched with uncertainty. But then he straightened, puffing out his chest as if daring anyone to challenge him. Daniels shifted uncomfortably, his hand trembling near his side. Angela's mind spun. Every instinct told her to crumble, to retreat, but something deeper inside her refused. She lifted her chin, blood running down the corner of her lip, and looked Malloy directly in the eyes. Her voice, though shaken, carried weight. "You'll regret this." The crowd murmured, sensing something shift in the air. Malloy laughed mockingly. "Regret? Lady, you should regret stepping out of your house tonight." But Angela didn't back down. She stood tall despite the sting in her cheek, despite the milk soaking into her shoes, despite the fear clawing at her chest. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. Daniels stepped forward, his face pale. He whispered urgently, almost too low for anyone else to hear. "Malloy, I think you messed with the wrong woman." Malloy scowled. "What are you talking about?" Daniel's eyes flicked nervously toward Angela, then back to Malloy. "You don't know who she is." The words cut through the tension like a knife, leaving the crowd hushed in confusion. Angela's heart skipped a beat. Who did Daniels think she was? What did he know? Malloy barked a laugh, though unease rippled beneath it. "She's nobody. Just another woman who doesn't know her place." Daniels shook his head, his voice trembling. "No, she's not nobody." He swallowed hard, eyes darting between Angela and the growing crowd. "If you knew her story, you'd realize what you just did might end your career. Or worse." Malloy's smirk faltered for the first time. The crowd leaned in, murmuring, sensing the storm building beneath the surface. Angela stood silent, her cheek throbbing, her groceries ruined, but her eyes blazing with quiet fire. And then Daniels said something that made Angela's breath catch and Malloy's confidence shatter. "She's connected to someone you should never have crossed." The crowd erupted in questions. Malloy stiffened, his jaw tight. Angela's mind raced, confusion mixing with fear. Connected to someone? Who?
Before anyone could speak again, sirens wailed in the distance. More police cars speeding toward the scene. The flashing red and blue lights painted the street in chaos, the tension rising to a fever pitch. Angela felt her knees weaken as her heart hammered against her chest. She had no idea what was about to unfold, but she knew one thing for certain. Everything had just changed. And as Malloy turned toward the approaching sirens, Daniels whispered one last chilling warning that echoed louder than the sirens themselves. "This is only the beginning." Angela stands frozen in front of Malloy as he grips her arm tighter, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "People like you," he growled, "don't belong here. One day, I'll make sure everyone knows it." The crowd gasped, phones lifted higher, Carter's hand hovered near her holster. And then, Malloy's hand dropped to his belt. Angela's breath caught in her throat. Was he reaching for his gun? The wail of sirens grew louder, bouncing off brick walls and storefront windows, filling the night with a sense of imminent chaos. Angela stood frozen on the cracked pavement, her cheek burning from Malloy's slap, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. Around her, the small crowd of neighbors had grown. More cell phones lifted high, recording every second of this confrontation. Some whispered in shock, others muttered angrily, but none dared to step closer. Malloy shifted uncomfortably, his smug demeanor beginning to waver. He wasn't used to this many eyes on him. His jaw tightened as he glanced toward Daniels, whose nervous warning still echoed in Angela's ears. "She's connected to someone you should never have crossed." Angela wanted to ask what that meant, but before she could, the flashing lights of 2 additional cruisers swept across the scene. Tires screeched as the cars skidded to a stop, doors flying open. For more officers spilled out, their hands already on weapons, scanning the crowd. Malloy straightened, trying to regain control. "Backup's here," he muttered under his breath, as if the sight of reinforcements could erase his mistake. But Daniel's face only grew paler. He leaned in closer to Malloy. "You don't get it. This isn't just another random stop. You've messed with someone important." Malloy scoffed, though a trace of doubt flickered across his eyes. "Important? She's just a nurse, Daniels." Angela lifted her chin, her voice carrying enough to silence the crowd. "Just a nurse," she repeated, her words sharp. "I've saved more lives than you can count. I've held the hands of dying men who wore uniforms like yours. I've comforted mothers who lost their sons because of mistakes made by people in power. I'm not just anything. Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement, some shouting, "Tell him." Others cheered softly, their anger building like a wave. But before Malloy could respond, the new officers approached. The leader, Sergeant Carter, a stern woman with eyes like steel, pushed through the crowd. "What's going on here?" she demanded. Malloy gestured at Angela, with exaggerated frustration. This woman was acting suspicious, resisting instructions. I had to step in. The crowd erupted with shouts. "That's a lie. We saw everything." He hit her. Dozens of phones pointed directly at Carter, recording her every move. Angela swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She knew this moment was pivotal. She had a choice: shrink under the weight of the accusation, or speak her truth. She stepped forward, her voice steady but edged with fire. "Sergeant, I came from the store with groceries. That man destroyed them, slapped me across the face, and now he's lying. The whole block saw it. You have 20 witnesses." The sergeant's gaze flicked between Angela, Malloy, and the buzzing crowd. Daniels shifted uneasily beside her, sweat glistening on his forehead. Carter's eyes narrowed. "Is that true, Malloy?" Malloy clenched his jaw. "She's exaggerating. These people always exaggerate." Angela's chest tightened, fury burning inside her. But before she could respond, Daniels suddenly spoke up. His voice cracked, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's not exaggerating. I saw it." Malloy slapped her. The crowd gasped. Dozens of heads whipped toward Daniels, stunned by his confession. Malloy spun on him, rage flashing in his eyes. "What the hell are you doing?" Daniels swallowed hard, trembling, but his voice grew stronger. "I'm telling the truth. You went too far. And you don't even know who she is." Angela's eyes widened, her heart pounding faster. Again with that cryptic warning. "Who did he think I was?" Carter raised an eyebrow, suspicion etched across her face. "And who exactly is she?" Daniels hesitated, his lips trembling, as if revealing the truth would ignite a fire too big to control. Finally, he spoke. "Angela Thompson is the sister of Judge Samuel Thompson." The name dropped like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Carter's stern face flickered with shock. Judge Samuel Thompson, a man known across the state for his uncompromising rulings on corruption, his fierce advocacy for justice, and his high-profile battles against police misconduct. Angela's stomach lurched. She hadn't wanted this connection dragged into the open tonight. Her brother was powerful, yes, but she had fought her whole life not to rely on his shadow, not to let his influence define her. She wanted to be known as Angela, the nurse who worked tirelessly for her community, not just Samuel's sister. Malloy's face turned ashen, his earlier arrogance crumbling. He stammered, "Judge Thompson? As in that Thompson?" Daniels nodded grimly. "Exactly. And you just laid your hands on his sister, in front of cameras, in front of witnesses." The crowd erupted, voices rising, the phones shaking as people shouted over one another. "He's done. She's the judge's sister? Oh, it's over for him." Malloy's hands trembled, though he tried to mask it with a sneer. "She never said who she was." Angela's voice sliced through the noise. "I shouldn't have to. Respect isn't something you give only to the powerful. It's something you owe to every human being." The crowd cheered, voices swelling with support. Carter stepped closer to Malloy, her expression hard. "This is serious. You've put the entire department at risk tonight." Malloy shook his head, desperation creeping into his voice. No, this is blown out of proportion. She's just using her brother's name to." But before he could finish, Carter cut him off sharply. "Enough. You're coming with me." Malloy's face twisted in rage as Carter reached for his arm. He yanked it back, snarling. "Don't touch me. I didn't do anything wrong." The crowd booed, shouting in unison, their anger growing louder by the second. Daniels stepped back, fear flashing across his face. Angela stood rooted to the spot, her chest tight, her eyes locked on Malloy. And then, in a single terrifying moment, Malloy's hand shot toward his belt. Not for his cuffs, but for his weapon. Gasps pierced the night. Phones shook violently as people screamed. Carter's eyes widened, her own hand flying to her holster. Daniels froze, his mouth opening in shock.
Angela's heart slammed against her ribs. The world seemed to slow, every sound muffled except the pounding in her ears. Was Malloy really about to draw his gun on her, in front of dozens of witnesses, in front of cameras, knowing exactly who she was? Her knees trembled, but her gaze never left his. For the first time that night, Malloy's mask of power cracked, revealing something darker. Fear, desperation, and a dangerous recklessness that could change everything in a heartbeat. The crowd screamed, Carter shouted, Daniels lunged. And the world held its breath as Malloy's fingers wrapped around the handle of his gun. After Angela refuses to back down, Malloy's face twists with rage. The crowd grows restless, shouting louder, phones recording every second. Enough of this. Malloy barked. His hand snapped to his sidearm. Angela's scream tore through the night as the metallic click of a gun echoed in the air. The screen goes black. Malloy's fingers tightened around the grip of his gun, the metallic glint catching the glow of the streetlight. The crowd screamed louder. Phones shook wildly as people backed away in terror, some dropping grocery bags and scattering behind cars for cover. The tension in the air was so sharp it could split skin. Angela's chest seized, her breath caught halfway between a scream and a prayer. She could hear children crying somewhere behind her, their mothers pulling them close. Every muscle in her body told her to run, but her feet stayed rooted, her eyes locked on Malloy. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. Malloy, don't you dare. Sergeant Carter's voice cracked like a whip as her hand darted for her holster. Daniels lunged forward, grabbing at Malloy's arm, shouting, Stop. You're making this worse. His voice was desperate, a last-ditch attempt to stop the inevitable. Malloy snarled, jerking his arm free, but the struggle bought Angela a split second, just enough to see the madness in his eyes. This wasn't about law, or justice, or even survival anymore. Malloy was drowning in the quicksand of his own pride, and he was ready to drag everyone else down with him. The crowd roared, voices echoing through the night. Put it down. You're on camera. Don't do it. Angela's mind flashed with images. Her patients, her brother in the courtroom, the family she had comforted after tragedies. This couldn't be where her story ended, on a dirty sidewalk at the hands of a desperate man. And then, everything happened at once. Carter drew her weapon, shouting, Malloy, drop it now. Daniels shoved hard against Malloy's chest. Angela stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own groceries. And Malloy ripped the gun free, his hand shaking, his eyes wild. The crowd screamed as a shot rang out. For a heartbeat, silence followed. Angela's ears rang, her heart hammering. She looked down at her chest, expecting pain, blood, something. But there was nothing. She was alive. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Slowly, Angela turned her head. Daniels staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His face was twisted in pain, but his eyes locked on Angela with determination. Don't let him win, he gasped. The world erupted. Carter tackled Malloy, slamming him against the hood of a cruiser. The crowd roared in fury, some shouting for Malloy's arrest, others screaming in panic at the sight of blood. Phones shook violently as people tried to capture every angle. Angela dropped to her knees beside Daniels, her nurse's instincts taking over. Stay with me. You're going to be okay, she cried, ripping a scarf from a bag and pressing it against his wound. Daniels winced but managed a weak smile. Guess. I finally did the right thing. Tears blurred Angela's vision. Hold on. Just hold on. Behind her, Carter wrestled the gun from Malloy's grip, cuffing him with swift, brutal precision. Malloy's face was red with rage, spittle flying as he screamed. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over. The crowd booed, their voices rising in a chorus of fury. Some shouted for justice, others cried out in fear. Angela could barely hear them over the pounding of her heart and Daniel's ragged breathing. An ambulance wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Relief washed over Angela, but it was fragile, temporary. Because even as Malloy was shoved into the back of a cruiser, his words lingered in the air like smoke. This isn't over. Angela looked up, her hands still pressing against Daniel's wound, her face set with determination. She knew Malloy wasn't just spitting empty threats. There was something darker beneath his rage, something that wouldn't end with handcuffs. The ambulance screeched to a halt, medics rushing to Daniel's side. One of them gently pulled Angela back, but she refused to move until she was sure they had control. As they lifted Daniels onto a stretcher, his hand caught hers, gripping tight despite the pain. Angela. His voice was hoarse, trembling. Be careful. Malloy, he's connected. He's not alone. Her stomach dropped. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his eyes fluttered closed as the medics carried him away. Angela stood in the flashing red and blue lights, her body trembling, but her resolve hardening. She could feel the weight of every camera still recording, every set of eyes watching her. For years, she had lived quietly, helping her community in ways that rarely drew attention. But tonight, she realized something. The spotlight was no longer a choice. And in the shadows, Malloy's words echoed like a curse. This isn't over. Angela's gaze shifted to the cruiser where Malloy sat, thrashing against his cuffs, his eyes burning with hatred. She didn't know how, but she knew with bone-deep certainty he would find a way to strike back. And when he did, it wouldn't just be her life at stake. The night air was thick with fear, hope, and uncertainty, every person in the crowd buzzing with the same unspoken question. What would happen when Malloy made his move? Malloy is arrested, but Daniels is wounded, and Angela learns Malloy is connected. The threat is far from over.
The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled, the air buzzing with tension. Camera crews jostled for position outside, and inside, reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. Angela sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded on the polished wood, her chin held high. On the other side sat Officer Malloy, flanked by his attorneys, his jaw clenched like a man who'd already decided the world was against him. The judge entered, and the crowd fell silent. The gavel struck once. This court is now in session. Angela's lawyer stood, a sharp woman in her 40s with a voice that commanded respect. Your Honor, members of the jury, she began. This case is not just about one woman's humiliation. It's about power abused and dignity stripped in public view. It's about whether the law protects all of us, or only some. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Viewers leaned in, waiting for the first piece of evidence. And when the lawyer clicked the remote, a giant screen lit up. It was video footage from that night. The crowd watched in silence as Malloy's voice boomed. People like you don't belong here. Every word, every sneer, every shove, caught in crystal clarity. The jurors exchanged glances. The hook had landed. Malloy's attorney tried to object. He spun excuses, claimed the video was taken out of context. But then came witness after witness. A shopkeeper who'd seen everything. A teenage boy who recorded from across the street. And finally, Officer Carter, Malloy's own partner. When she took the stand, the entire courtroom leaned forward. I told him to stop, Carter said, her voice steady but heavy. He ignored me. He said no one would ever believe her over him. He said, she paused, eyes glistening. He said he'd make sure she remembered her place. The room erupted. Malloy's face turned red. His hands balled into fists. The hook dug deeper. The audience needed to know. Could this man possibly escape justice now? Finally, it was Angela's moment. She walked to the witness stand, every step deliberate, her floral dress swishing softly against the floor. She looked at the jurors, not down, not away, but directly into their eyes. I didn't ask for trouble that night, she began, her voice calm, yet carrying through the room. I just wanted to walk home. But he looked at me and saw less than human. He thought no one would stop him. That's why I'm here, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. The gallery went silent. Some jurors swallowed hard. One woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. It wasn't just testimony. It was truth, raw, unshakable, unforgettable. The judge banged the gavel for order, his stern face betraying nothing. Court will recess. Jury deliberation begins immediately. The jurors filed out, their faces unreadable. Malloy sat rigid, sweat beading his forehead. Angela folded her hands again, her heart pounding. The crowd waited. Minutes stretched into hours. The tension became unbearable. Finally, the door opened. The jury returned. The foreman stood, paper trembling in his hands. We, the jury, find the defendant. The entire courtroom leaned forward. Angela closed her eyes. Malloy gripped the edge of the table. The screen goes black. The jury foreman's voice trembled as the paper shook in his hand. The entire courtroom froze, as if the air itself refused to move. We, the jury, find the defendant. A pause. A silence that stretched so tight it could snap. Guilty. On all counts. The words exploded through the room like thunder. Angela gasped. Tears welled in her eyes, not of weakness, but of relief. A weight she had carried for months, maybe years, lifted off her shoulders. The gallery erupted in cheers, shouts, and sobs. Some people stood, clapping, while others simply held their faces in their hands, overwhelmed. And Malloy? His face turned ashen, his body sagging in his chair. The man who once sneered with arrogance now sat powerless, the iron mask of authority shattered. The judge's gavel banged, demanding order. Quiet in the court. But even the judge's stern voice couldn't contain the tidal wave of justice finally breaking free. Officer Malloy, the judge declared, you are hereby stripped of your badge and sentenced. The details of the sentence rang like music in the ears of those who had watched Angela stand tall against the odds. Years in prison. Stripped of pension. reputation destroyed. For once, the uniform did not shield the man inside. Malloy's head dropped into his hands as the bailiffs led him away. And Angela? She stood tall, unbroken. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust into Angela's face. "How does it feel to win?" one shouted. Angela didn't flinch. She didn't boast. She simply said, "This isn't just my victory. It's for anyone who has ever been silenced. It's proof that truth, no matter how small, can stand against lies." But then came the twist no one expected. A man approached her slowly, carrying a briefcase. His suit was immaculate, his demeanor calm. "I've been watching your case," he said. "I represent a national organization fighting civil rights abuses. Angela, we want you to join us. Not just as a voice, but as a leader. This fight is far from over." Gasps echoed among the reporters. The cleaning lady who once scrubbed floors for a living was now being asked to stand on the national stage. Angela blinked, overwhelmed, but inside she knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something greater. Weeks later, Angela walked onto a stage at a rally. Thousands of people cheered, holding signs, chanting her name. Cameras flashed, and the world finally saw her. Not as a victim, but as a symbol of resilience, dignity, and power. Her voice carried across the crowd. "No one can take your worth away. No uniform, no badge, no arrogance. Stand tall. Speak out. And never, ever let anyone silence you." The crowd roared. The cleaning lady was gone. A leader had risen. And now, to you, watching this story unfold. If Angela's fight inspired you, if her courage made you feel even a spark of hope, then this is your moment. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of strength, justice, and humanity that the world needs to remember. Like this video if you believe that truth always finds its way to the light. Comment below where you're watching from, and let us know, what would you have done if you were in Angela's shoes? Because your voice matters. Together, we're building a community that refuses to stay silent. This isn't just Angela's story. It's all of ours. And trust me, the next story we share will leave you speechless.